Let's talk about some rather massive revelations from the climax of the Horus heresy, with a blow-by-blow account of how the duel between Horus and the Emperor really went down. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought I'd talk a bit about the End and Death Volume 3, recently released from Black Library, and perhaps as it goes one of the most interesting Warhammer 40k lore books out there, detailing the final blows of the Horus heresy, something that just about every Warhammer 40k player will know the general strokes of, as it sets up the entire setting for the tabletop game as we know it. Over the past many years, Games Workshop has been slowly retelling the entire story of the Horus heresy, starting out with Horus Rising, and then the series being developed in all manner of different directions by a number of different authors. They're basically all progressing slowly towards this final confrontation, Horus versus the Emperor on the Bridge of the Vengeful Spirit. I'd argue that this is perhaps the single most narrative event that sets up the entire setting of Warhammer 40k, an ancient betrayal long in the past that has the Emperor interred on his golden throne and the Imperium in a perpetual state of decline and despair. The rough narrative of the conflict is generally known, but it's never really been explored in novel form before, at least until now, with the last few books of the Siege of Terra series being called The End and the Death, bringing a big chunk of many of the narrative threads established throughout the other books to a head, though still leaving us with plenty of questions and loose ends for future endeavours. This sequence was written by the well-renowned author Dan Abnett, very popular among 40k writers, and for this video I thought I'd just go through a very rough overview of a few of the more broad strokes of the book, as I must admit I was genuinely curious as to how an event of this magnitude would be handled and any other details that we know about the Emperor's final confrontation. Obviously I massively recommend reading the book yourself. I feel like a brief summary of plot points doesn't really do the entire thing justice, particularly with all the warp chicanery and sort of allegorical things that happen in this. That works a lot better actually on the page as opposed to as a bullet point synopsis. Obviously a big spoiler warning for the events of the book in this video. I did think there was some really interesting stuff though, plenty of interesting lore details that we kind of expected, but also some genuine new stuff that kind of puts Horus's fall and the Emperor in a whole new light. I think it's overall a really quite cool, indulgent fight sequence you'd kind of expect for it being pretty much the biggest and baddest fight in Warhammer 40k and the 30k setting. Getting into it though, and from the prior books of the Siege of Terra, this one is just the third of three, so a fair bit has happened already, never mind in all the rest of the Siege of Terra books and the rest of the Horus Heresy series. A lot of work has come up to this point. In general though, the traitor legions are sieging Terra, much of the loyalist forces can't get there, and in a last-ditch effort to bring the Horus heresy to a head, the Emperor, Dawn, Sanguinius and Constantine Valdor have all boarded the Vengeful Spirit, with an aim to behead the forces of Chaos and slay Horus once and for all. The various heroes were separated though. Dawn was trapped in a sort of warped desert dimension and tormented for what felt like centuries by Khorne, ultimately remaining steadfast and defiant though, even in the face of a Chaos deity. Sanguinius was slain at the hand of the War Master when he realises that he could never turn him to his side. The death of the angel is rather brutal, repeatedly clubbed to death by the War Master's mace and then broken with the talon of Horus. And the Emperor himself had been fighting his way through the ship and rather letting his deity-like status get a hold of him. It sounded like his dread presence was getting a hold of him so much that he was at risk of becoming a fifth Chaos deity in the Dark King. But ultimately he was able to return to himself and his humanity, relinquish some of the power that godhood would have granted him, and prevent the birth of something potentially even worse than Horus and the Chaos deities. He also did something with splitting a segment of his soul off and casting it into the stars. Potentially that could be a future plot point, as in theory there's an unspoilt chunk of the Emperor's soul out there, which I'm sure could be a good one for people to theorise about in the future. While the confrontation is happening on the Vengeful Spirit, plenty of developments are happening on Terra, which are sort of interspersed with the Vengeful Spirit narrative in the book. There's a few segments detailing what some of the other Primarchs are doing, plus Ahriman is snooping around. Guilliman's fleet is trying to get to Terra but is unable to without the Astronomicon and the warp storms in the way. Perturabo is leaving the system, vowing to destroy Horus himself after fortifying and recovering his legion's strength. Lorgar is hopeful that the confrontation with Horus and the Emperor will leave Horus crippled and he could perhaps take a helm of the Chaos Rebellion. Planetside, the Blood Angels are driven insane by Sanguinius' death. Basically a massive dose of the Black Rage overcomes essentially the entire legion. A psychic shockwave of Sanguinius' brutal end sends them into murder rampage mode, tearing apart anything that they can get their weapons on, including a great many loyalist space marines, who were fighting alongside them as their battle brothers moments before. Some are more able to resist than others, but the majority of the Legion is in berserk rampage mode. There's a great battle to relight the beacon of the Astronomicon that can allow the Loyalist forces to navigate to Terra. The Death Guard are the antagonists here, brutally pushing forward with Typhus at their helm, but their advance is stopped by Sigismund and his force of Imperial Fit, backed up by Cypher and a force of fallen Dark Angels, plus a pious form of Terran refugees, whose faith brings them to the Great Beacon. The Death Guard forces are disrupted and beaten back by Cypher long enough to allow the Astronomicon to be relit, though as with 40k in the current setting it's hungry for souls, and the mortal Imperial citizens are consumed by its light to broadcast a great beacon across the galaxy. Otherwise, in the Imperial Palace, there's not one but two massive super weapons that are potentially ready to be deployed by the Loyalist defenders. The Virus Crafter Basilio Foe is under the protection of Amon, who very nearly triggers the viral superweapon to wipe out all Space Marines on Terra as a last-ditch effort to stop the traitors from gaining the planet, though no guidance from Primarchs or the Emperor stays their hand for now, and Foe is slain by Amon himself as he tries to escape. Holding the throne room, Primarch Vulcan is guarding Malkador the Sigillite, another perpetual and confidant of the Emperor, who is busy sacrificing himself, keeping the golden throne ticking over, though everything seems to be melting down around him, and the throne is utterly consuming him and burning him up. Vulcan is ready with a doomsday device of his own called the Talisman of Seven Hammers, a secret dead man switch that can be used to demolish all of Terra should the traitors break through and take the throne. Again, another way of ultimate sacrifice to deny Chaos the seat of the Empire. Despite traitors banging at the gates, Vulcan stays his hand, wanting to wait till the last possible moment. On the bridge of the Vengeful Spirits, the Emperor reaches Horus's command center, accompanied by Loken, Leto, and a custodian. Tragically, they find Sanguinius slain and his corpse strung up on display. The Emperor surprisingly calmly asking why his son is slain, with Horus attempting to bring the Emperor around to his way of thinking, though it becomes clear that the Emperor is more trying to address the Chaos Gods that are working through Horus at this point, and despite Loken appealing to his Primarch's humanity and mortality, Horus does not change from his course, despite very enormous grief and sadness. The first blows are struck and the fight between the Emperor and Horus is joined. Elsewhere on the ship, Constantine Valdor, the commander of the Custodians, confronts Abaddon, Erebus, and a huge force of Sons of Horus and Wordbearers, and there's also a brief fight between Constantine Valdor and Abaddon himself. Valdor wounds Abaddon in the hand with his spear, which briefly gives him visions of Abaddon's destiny in the current setting of Warhammer 40k, the name Despoiler being revealed to him. They're then separated in the carnage and warp magic going everywhere, and Abaddon proceeds to teach the rest of the Custodians a lesson in humility, slaying a great number of them personally. Rogel Dawn joins the fighting and is able to break through the melee with a wounded Valdor, attempting to make their way to assist the Emperor versus Horus. In Horus's sanctum, the battle is joined and the force of the conflict is destroying much of the starship, with these two god-level characters going hammer and tongs at each other, with both massive weapons and psychic might. Horus attempts to burn the Emperor with a mighty warp lightning attack that is only stopped by his companions intervening, and the 4 Chaos Deities themselves appear to be watching on from the shadows, as their champion holds his own against the Master of Mankind, though not without difficulty. The battle then takes a bit of a metaphysical turn, with the pair transported across a great number of planets, environments, and other warp chicanery, and in this dreamlike state there's a sequence in which they play the Emperor's tarot cards against each other, Horus eventually scattering the Emperor's deck with a Worldbreaker card. The Emperor's allies are unable to intervene, perceiving the pair as fighting but a long way away and unable to reach them. After this, the fight gets a bit more back to reality. The Emperor draws on Horus's own power from the Chaos Deities, striking him down with a massive psychic attack, and is able to wrest Worldbreaker off him, repeatedly beating him down with it. Though infused by the powers of Chaos, Horus rapidly heals and strikes back, catching the Emperor in the neck and knocking him down once more. The Emperor is in quite a bad shape by this point, and Horus attempts to try and drag him to one of 5 thrones within a starred room, brutally nailing his body to it and attempting to craft him a crown of chaos for him to wear. I'm not sure if it's partly in humiliation or if he's trying to imply in some way that the Emperor needs to fulfill his destiny as a different chaos deity of his own right. Not 100% sure what to make of that bit. Then there's a sequence where basically several allies appear one after another to aid the Emperor and briefly distract Horus. The Emperor pretty much having been beaten in this fight once already, the Custodians and Leto are able to take him down from that throne, the Custodian being obliterated by a beam from Horus's armor. The Emperor is able to capitalize and attack Horus once again, but Horus gains the upper hand. Alanius Pius and John Grammaticus, previously ordered to stay behind by the Emperor, join the fray. All fulfills his destiny by attacking Horus with lasgun before being laid low, cementing his name forever in Imperial Guard history and legend. Then after this, Lockham returns to appeal to Horus once more, saying that he's merely the pawn of the Chaos Gods, and he's not truly acting in his own right, and giving up on his previous goals to try and enthrone the Emperor on that five-pointed throne thing. Horus chooses to try and end this then and there, and staves in the Emperor's head with Worldbreaker, apparently slaying the Master of Mankind. In what should be his moment of ultimate triumph, Horus feels very hollow, with Lockham's words apparently having touched a nerve, and as the powers of chaos seek to utterly claim and reward him and push him to new levels of power, Horus instead utterly rejects their influence, banishing them from him, and their supernatural power fades from the Primarch in one act of great defiance. Turning back to Locken, however, it seems that Horus has been tricked, as the Master of Mankind it seems that the Emperor is able to take all manner of forms, and the broken body that Horus thinks he has killed is not truly the Emperor, coming apart and dissolving, as the figure of Locken is revealed to be the Emperor after all. The two fight in one last desperate brutal confrontation, both of them mortally wounded, perhaps the Emperor more so than Horus, and Horus also manages to smash one of the Emperor's eyes in this encounter. Then though, in a last final act of defiance, the Emperor rises and strikes Horus down, blasting him with a beam of sanctic energy, and bereft of the sheer might of the four Chaos Gods to back him up, Horus is struck down by this. Horus and the Emperor know that if he chooses to call back on the power of the Chaos Gods, they will answer him, and he could still win that confrontation, but instead Horus decides that he does not want to go down this path, does not want to be a puppet of the gods, and asks for the Emperor to put an end to him once and for all. The deities desperately try to rush back to intervene, but the Emperor gathers all of his will and plunges an anathema blade into Horus's heart, the Emperor's final words to him being, "I wait for you and I forgive you." I feel like that sequence does change the narrative a little bit around Horus's death. I don't think it had been said before that Horus renounced the Chaos deities and the Warp before being slain, and ultimately it seems that the Emperor triumphed over Horus more due to tricks and intervention of his companions, as opposed to necessarily just martial might. It seems that not even the Emperor could stand before Horus when he was empowered by the might of four gods. Those last words are kind of cryptic as well. "I wait for you" kind of implies that they'll see each other again sometime. I'm not sure if he means in death somehow, or at some point they'll be reincarnated. One part of the old lore around this was generally the idea that Horus was destroyed body and soul, burned so thoroughly out of the existence by the Emperor that no one could come back from it, though that isn't quite as explicitly confirmed in this book, more just that the Emperor slew him with an anathema blade and put all his force and will into the strike. With Horus's death though, the Loyalist forces essentially take victory. The onlooking Chaos deities are banished back to the Warp. The Warp withdraws from Terra, and the Astronomicon blazes through to guide the fleets to the planet, and the Blood Angels begin to emerge from their blinded black rage. I suspect their reputation is rather tarnished at this point. Dawn, Valdor, and the remaining Custodians find the fallen pair, the Emperor fallen to the floor from his many injuries, seeming to have only been sustained by his own will, though his near-lifeless body still has a spark of life within it, and true to the 40k lore, he is borne away by the silently weeping Custodians, along with Sanguinius's body and the skull of Ferrus Manus, and interred upon the Golden Throne, Malcador of Sigilite, having sacrificed himself utterly to keep it functioning, burnt away body and soul. Some of the first prayers by the Loyalists are heard to the Emperor towards the end of the book, appealing to the throne and his mercy. Finally, for the Sons of Horus, Locken refuses to leave his fallen War Master. The Primarch of his legion lies slain, even if they were fighting on different sides at the end, and Abaddon and the Sons of Horus are next to enter the throne room. Despite Locken's pleas, they refuse to surrender to the Imperial forces, but Abaddon is merciful and allows him to leave should he wish to, bearing some honour in the great defeat at the end of the heresy. However, Erebus has other ideas and slays Locken with a blow from behind, apparently his death somehow creating the demon Samus which featured earlier in the series. Not really too sure as to the logistics of that one or quite what it means. I guess maybe it's warp shenanigans that allow a demon in the future to have effect in the past. Not 100% sure there. Seems that Erebus is going nowhere as the character that everyone loves to hate. Overall, really quite interesting just from a brief lore synopsis all in all. I definitely recommend checking out the actual book for the retelling, of course. I must admit it does feel interesting to have a book that sort of ventures on holy ground with absolute canon events to the entire setting of the Heresy and 40k. I feel like it's kind of interesting to dig into the deep lore of the 40k universe. Kind of big that the Emperor was that close to becoming a chaos deity in his own right, and that Horus ultimately recanted chaos before his death. In any case, let me know what you think and feel free to fill in any other details down in the comments. I know I'll have missed a whole load in this video. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, including new ones out just about every day. I tend to focus more on gameplay and tactics things, though every so often I feel like it's interesting to cover lore stuff that particularly shakes up the setting in one way or another. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry to the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.